Fall in, Polk County. This is today's veteran. Welcome to a new year of today's veteran. I'm your host, Kate West. In this episode, we sit down with historian Lloyd Harris to discuss how the Civil War touched Polk County. We will also hear war stories from Jose Sanchez, a retiree from the Marine Corps, and Army veteran Anthony Nicholson. But first, I'll update you on the news and information affecting the veteran community. Prepare to copy. Your sitrep is to follow. In the past, a new year meant it was time again for veterans and beneficiaries to fill out a new Eligibility Verification Report, or EVR. In December, however, the Department of Veterans Affairs announced that it will no longer require the form to be filled out annually. The VA will work with the Internal Revenue Service and Social Security Administration to implement a new process for verifying a veteran's eligibility for benefits. Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Eric Shinseki, said that by working together, the VA has cut the red tape for veterans and will help ensure these brave men and women get the benefits they have earned and deserve. By eliminating the nearly 150,000 EVRs that would have been sent out this month, more than 100 VA employees will be redirected to work on reducing the growing backlog of veteran compensation claims. Information about VA pension benefits can be found online at benefits.va.gov/pension, or you can visit the Department of Defense VA web portal at ebenefits.va.gov. Veterans applying for reimbursement for out-of-pocket medical expenses will still be required to complete a medical expense report for 2012. The report must be received by the VA no later than 1 March. If you need assistance in completing the medical expense report or have any questions about eligibility claims, call 534-5220 to make an appointment with a Polk County Veteran Services officer. It's time to retire the check. The U.S. Department of the Treasury will no longer issue paper checks for federal benefits after 1 March 2013. This changeover has been several years in the making and will include VA benefits as well as all other federally issued benefits, including Social Security and supplemental security income. If you have not yet signed up to receive electronic payment for benefits, don't wait any longer. Sign up for direct deposit by going online to godirect.org or call the hotline at 1-800-333-1795. Those who do not sign up for direct deposit before 1 March or who do not have an account at a financial institution will be issued their benefit payments on a prepaid debit card. Direct deposit is safer and reduces the risk of payments being lost or stolen, but it's also cheaper. The Treasury Department reported that it costs 92 cents more to issue a paper check than an electronic payment. Phasing out paper checks is estimated to save taxpayers $1 billion over the next 10 years. Women veterans in Florida have a new voice in Washington, D.C. Lori Gerson is the newly appointed Veteran Claims Examiner for the Federal VA Committee on Women Veterans and will be able to speak up for the issues that women veterans are facing. Gerson says that her top priority is getting a full-time women's veteran coordinator for each state in order to provide consistent service for female veterans throughout the country. Currently, only 3 out of the 50 states have such a position. Hiring Our Heroes is an initiative from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to help veterans find meaningful employment. 2012 saw an expansion of the project, including the creation of a standalone program for military spouses. If you are looking for a job, make plans to attend the hiring fair in Tampa on 17 January or the fair in Orlando on 7 February. For a complete listing of hiring fairs and for more information about the Hiring Our Heroes program, Go to uschamber.com/hiringourheroes.
Last year marked the beginning of the 150th anniversary of the Civil War nationwide. Many of the people don't know that the Civil War actually touched Polk County. Both blue and gray shed blood here. We wanted to talk today about how the Civil War touched Polk County, and joining us in the studio is Lloyd Harris, chairman of the Polk County Historical Commission representing District 2. Lloyd is retired Sergeant First Class with 21 years service in the Army. For the past 18 years, he's been employed at Summerlin Academy in Bartow High School as an Army instructor in the JROTC program. Thanks for joining us today, Lloyd.
Thank you, Mike.
Well, you know, let's get right into it. The Civil War, what happened in Polk County?
Well, 150 years ago, a lot of people don't know it, as you led into the intro, that the blue and gray actually touched Polk County. Florida seceded from the Union on January 10th, 1861. Within a month, on February 8th, 1861, Polk County was formed, which we celebrated last year during our sesquicentennial. It just so happens that last year also, coincident with our own sesquicentennial, is the celebration, or the commencement of the celebration, of the Civil War nationwide.
Yeah. And so, were there any battles here?
Yes, there were at least, we know that 3 times Union forces came up the Peace River Valley and actually came into Polk County and skirmished or had small battles. Fort Meade, as a site, Union or former military post, was actually burned during the last raid. Okay. The Civil War touched our county in many ways. Those were the times. We don't have time to get into all the reasons and the beings of the war itself. However, it was, just as it touched the nation, it also touched the counties. It split families here. It prompted and caused people to choose sides. Those in the early stages of the war in 1861, Polk County was a wilderness, basically. There were less than, or just over rather, 300 registered voters who cast votes that year for president out of our brand new county that was formed. Those who were sympathized with the Union left this area. They fled down to Fort Myers. So they went down the Peace River Valley to Fort Myers.
Was there a Union base, a Union fort down at Fort Myers?
The Union had reestablished the Seminole War Fort Myers as part of the blockade of the Gulf of Mexico in conjunction with the larger naval blockade around the southern states. Okay. A lot of raids took place from Fort Myers. It happened shortly after Florida seceded from the Union due to setbacks at the Battle of Shiloh out in the western theater of the war. A call came to Florida for troops. Polk County mobilized and sent a company of soldiers who were nicknamed the South Florida Bulldogs. Okay. They left here in March of 1862, 79 men. They walked to Gainesville, where they were enlisted or joined the Confederate Army. They mustered in as a Company E of the 7th Florida Infantry. They were nicknamed the South Florida Bulldogs, after the old cattle or the cow dogs that they employed around here to herd cows. That particular unit was headed up at that time by local pioneer Nathan Snow Blunt. He later became the major and the regimental commander for the 7th Florida Infantry. Okay. Those men were gone away from the county. They fought in the western theater of the Civil War in Tennessee, North Georgia, and those areas. A lot of the other men in the county at that time that didn't go to Union-held Fort Myers, also many of them joined the Confederate Army as well. As things were going bad, or you might say going south, yeah, for the Confederacy, there was a need for food. When Mississippi fell on July 4th, 1863, when Vicksburg fell, it cut off all the supplies and the beef and such that was normally coming in through Texas.
So obviously beef and Florida kind of go together. And
that is exactly what made Polk County so interesting and so valuable to the Confederacy. Yeah. Not only Polk County, but the Peace River Valley. There were thousands of cows ranging in this area. And so in mid-1863, those fellows who had left here and were in the Army of Northern Virginia and the Army of Tennessee who were fighting, who were particularly skilled in herding cows, were detached from service with those armies and sent back to Florida, which they enjoyed because they're back home.
Yeah.
But they were organized into a quartermaster battalion, which was called Munnerlyn's Battalion. They were nicknamed the Cow Cavalry because their one effort, their one main mission was to simply herd cows. They would gather the cows in this area and bring them to Fort Meade. From Fort Meade, they were herded to Brooksville, and from Brooksville to Gainesville, and from Gainesville up to Waldo. At Waldo, the cows were put on trains and taken to Savannah, where they were butchered, packed in salt, and they became by 1864, Florida cattle were the sole meat rations for the Southern Army or the Confederate Army of Tennessee fighting against Sherman coming down through Georgia. Very particular, very important job for this area.
Yeah.
The skilled guys in this area were formed under the command of Captain Francis A. Hendry, for whom Hendry County's named. He's a local pioneer. They were stationed at Fort Meade, but not in particular at Fort Meade. They actually had the cattle operations working out of the old Methodist campground near Homeland. Okay. And the Union Army at the time also, headed up by a local pioneer who actually was the first settler in the Bartow area, and the Blunt family actually purchased his home site. His name was James D. Green. He had moved from Bartow after he sold his property to the Blunts, which is the founding of Bartow. He moved to Fort Meade. When the war started, he's one of those fellows that went to Fort Myers. He was a Union sympathizer. Midstream during the wartime, he was appointed or commissioned as a captain of cavalry, and he formed a small company of locals to come back up the river and to raid the cattle operation. In conjunction with the larger movement at that time, strategic operation in 1864, in February in particular, Union forces were coming into the state to capture Tallahassee from Jacksonville. Okay. So as those troops come in across the north of Florida, a raid is planned to come up from Fort Myers to the Peace River Valley to interdict the cattle operation in Fort Meade. Yeah. So a company of cattle, or cavalry, Union cavalry, they were called the Florida Mounted Rangers under Captain Green, left Fort Myers with 50 men. They came up the Peace River Valley, up the old trail that was blazed during the Seminole Indian War, and they actually encountered Confederate forces at Bowlegs Creek. Now, this would be the modern-day site of where Keller Road crosses Bowlegs Creek southeast of Fort Meade proper.
Yeah.
When they got there, they bumped heads, they skirmished, and both sides backed off. The official report after Captain Green returned to Fort Myers, he turned in his military report. He stated that there must have been at least 500 Confederates. The Confederates reported there must have been 1,000 Yankees coming up the trail, when in actuality there were 50 Union cavalrymen and 10 Confederates. So both sides were a little over excited about their reports. And of course it made it look a lot better if you were fighting a larger force. The Union wasn't content though. They came up that first incursion into this area, into Polk County. They planned another raid. So by March and April, they actually came back with a larger reconnaissance in force. Over 100 Union cavalrymen come back up the Peace River Valley, and they raid into Fort Meade. They burned some home sites. They rescue some locals, which they called refugees. About 70 to 80 refugees went back to Fort Myers. They burned homesteads. At that time, they also killed 2 people. One was Tom Underhill, and the other was pioneer James Lanier. Jim Lanier, they called him Old Man Jim Lanier, had actually been Green's neighbor before the war. Okay. And so the sad thing about the war is how it did break apart families and friends at that time. They came up, they raided, they took back about 1,000 head of cattle that they captured from this area. Yeah. On the second raid, when that was all taking place, the forces that were at Homeland, or the cattle operation there, had gone south to meet the Union forces. When the Union Army saw the Confederates arriving, they turned and progressed back to Fort Myers. This February incursion that came up the Peace River Valley didn't make it all the way to Fort Meade.
Okay.
The second raid that came up, they came into the Fort Meade area, but they were soon approached by Confederate forces and returned back to Fort Myers. They weren't really, I don't think they really knew opposing forces, numbers, and so as military people would do, it was a reconnaissance in force. They came up just checking things out, went back, and caused as much trouble as they could on both sides. During the entire operation, from this area, the cattle, they were herding about 2,500 cattle a week out of here, which is a lot of cows. So a lot of bovine regiments, you might call, were heading north to feed the armies. May of the same year, this is 1864, a third raid comes up. This time, they actually have African American troops with them. In December of 1863, a few months earlier, the 2nd United States Colored Troops, and they were called the 2nd Florida USCT, were stationed at Key West. They were to support operations within the Gulf of Mexico. They made raids into Bayport, Florida, up in the Panhandle and those areas. And 3 companies of U.S. colored troops came up the Peace River Valley with Captain Green's cavalry. They were told and given orders to capture local, what we revere as pioneers, to capture them if they could. They actually came into Fort Meade. They were told to make tracks like Indians in order to scare the locals and to, I guess, presuming that they would want the Southerners to think the Indians were also around as well. How they did that, I can only think that maybe they had some guys with moccasins to walk around and leave tracks. But on the third raid, they actually burned the Fort Meade, which had been the Seminole Indian War Fort Meade. After they burned the fort, they returned to Fort Myers. Interim to the second and third raid, actually the 64th Georgia was detached to Fort Meade. But when they were there, nothing happened, and they went back north. As they had gone north, the Union returned and burned the fort. During the entire time, though, the Confederate forces were always 6 miles north. The Union never, I don't believe that they actually knew that the Confederate forces were that far north. They thought when they burned Fort Meade that they had met the mission, accomplished the mission, and after they burned the fort, they returned to Fort Myers. Munnerlyn's battalion and Confederate forces retaliated and actually went down to attack Fort Myers, but it was for naught. It was the rainy season by that time. They made noise approaching the fort, and they exchanged shots. Were exchanged over a one-day period, and it was neither side was a winner if you count it as a military victory. So they returned at this time. Shortly after that, the war ended. Troops from Tampa came to this area and reported that the war was over, and that those few slaves that had been refugeed here from Virginia and those in this area were set free. So it was a day of jubilee. The people here were also ready for the war to be over. It was not a war for land, it was a war for cattle. And so the aggression in Polk County was economic in its base.
One of the other things I want to mention to you was, and we'd brought it up previously, was Jacob Summerlin. How does he kind of fit into what happened at that point in time?
Jacob Summerlin, we revere as the founder of Bartow, and he was the king of the crackers, they call him. He was one of the most wealthiest fellows in Florida at the time. He was the king of the cattle barons. And the cattle that was being herded from here, 2,000 to 2,500 a week, were his cattle. He was very benevolent and munificent in taking care of local people of whichever side they chose. Jacob Summerlin provided the cows and never received any remunification for them. He was promised so much money per head for every cow that he sold to the Confederacy. Of course, he never got it. And so after the war was over, that was his loss. But it never really hurt him financially, because he was so wealthy in cattle and prosperous in land. After the war was over, he donated 150 cows here to keep the local population alive during those early days of after the war was over and the early days into Reconstruction. The economy was shattered, so he provided for the local people. He gave land grants here to Bartow to establish churches, school, and a county government. He gave like gifts later to Orlando. He helped establish Fort Myers. During the war, he was not only involved in the cattle operation, but he kind of worked both sides of the fence. He was also involved in blockade running with James McKay from Tampa. And he really, at the end of the war, he was quick to say that he never really followed the tenets of the Confederate States, and he applied for grants to control the Peace River, and he was always interested in his cattle operation and helping his fellow man.
Right.
Here in Polk County, there are several places that people can visit where they can see it. You can actually go down to Keller Road, where it passes Bowlegs Creek, where the first skirmish took place. There's a monument to Stonewall Jackson in Fort Meade. General Jackson, who became famous during the war between the states, or the Civil War, was actually stationed in Fort Meade during the Third Seminole Indian War. And there's a monument there in their park that depicts that. Here in Bartow, there's a monument to the company that left the county and went away and fought in Tennessee and North Georgia and North Carolina, the South Florida Bulldogs. There's also a marker here for General Evander Law, who was a Confederate two-star general that moved to Bartow after the war to establish Florida's educational system. He was a pioneer in Florida education and established the military college here in Bartow. On the site of his home on Summerlin Street, there's a monument. Lakeland's Munn Park, after the war was over, has a very large Confederate monument to the Southern soldiers. If you visit the cemeteries in Polk County, there are distinctive graves that mark Union soldiers as well as Confederate soldiers. And so I'd encourage or invite people to go out and check these sites out. The United States Colored Troops actually have a monument in Fort Myers.
Really?
So if you're looking for an African-American site relative to the Civil War, travel down to Fort Myers and check out their United States Colored Troops 2nd Florida monument that they have down in one of their parks down there.
All right. Well, listen, Lloyd, I appreciate it. This is just amazing to me, hearing this, and actually with no notes, so it's unbelievable. But listen, I'd like to make sure we invite you back. I mean, we covered the Civil War today. Maybe we come back and next time do Spanish American or World War I, World War II. Would you be agreeable?
Absolutely.
All
yeah.
right.
Military history touched Polk County, of course, since the Spanish conquistadors, which we'll be celebrating next year with Viva Florida 500, when DeSoto's troops came through here. The Seminole Indian Wars, Civil War, Spanish-American War touched Lakeland and Bartow specifically. World War I, II, of course, the air bases and that. Great heritage, great legacy, and you can see it and live it and research it right here in Polk County.
All right. Well, listen, Lloyd, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
I served in the Marine Corps from 1987 to 2007 when I retired. And I guess my story is a funny story from Iraq. My last tour, we were in the city of Hit in the Al Anbar province, western Iraq. And one of our last major operations, and we were doing a clearing. And as you move, I was amphibious assault, big armored vehicles. And as we moved through the city, the townspeople would line the streets and always looking at you and everything. Well, the power lines hang probably 10 feet off the road, 10 to 12 feet off the road. So you always have to be very careful of maneuvering and getting the power lines so you don't get stuck on the vehicles. And we had this one crewman who was up there lifting power lines, and he was, had his weapon strapped in his flak jacket and everything, and he had been screaming at the kids. And the vehicle stopped, and he went right off the nose of the vehicle, head first into the street, and then the kids started laughing at him and pelting him with rocks, and we couldn't help but laugh at him. It's my funny story.
Yes, this was published by our commanding officer, whose name happened to be James Bond. And we'd always kid about that. Well, I would just like to mention about the unit I was in, because I don't think it's all about myself. I think it's about the men that I served with, because we lost a lot. Okay, I'm reading it off, I think, because I'm nervous. Okay, I was with C Company, 3rd Battalion, 187th Infantry, 101st Airborne Division. We were there from December of 1968 until December 1967 to November of 1968. Okay, we received the 3 highest awards that a company could receive, a battalion could receive. Okay, we received the Presidential Unit Citation for extraordinary heroism. The 3rd Battalion, 187th Airborne Infantry, distinguishes itself by extraordinary heroism in action against hostile forces in the vicinity of Thanh Bang, Hang Nang Province, Republic of South Vietnam, during the period 13 June 1968 to September 23, 1968. As a reactionary force, they repeatedly deployed into areas of heavy enemy concentration to destroy their thrust against Saigon from the Thanh Bang area west of the capital. Another way I stumbled through this, I didn't write it. But I just wanted to say that out of the 250-some men that we went over as a battalion, as a company, it was less than 20 of us came back from the original group. So we were a reactionary force. It didn't matter, it was Marines, it was Army, anybody that was in trouble. We went on a weekly, what they call a hot LZ. We went weekly where they were shooting at us before we even got off the helicopters. And so I feel that we were like the angels from the sky to these guys, and they really appreciated what we did, and we knew it. People say the Vietnam War was Vietnam conflict, and you hear the bad things, but there was a lot of good things. And I saw a lot of tragic things that happened to our American troops. And I just want you to know that the Vietnam War was just as bad as any other war. So it was worse than World War II, because World War II, there was a front line. Like World War I, there was a front line where you knew that if you were behind that line, you were safe. And the battling was going in front. But in Vietnam, when you were in the jungle, it was always around you. And even in the villages, it was still there, because they would have their black pajamas on at night and come get you. And you may have been friendly with them in the village, and they were shooting at you in the evening. So you just didn't know. And it took a lot of nervousness you were left with, because you just never knew. Every day you never knew. When we come in from the field, I know there was a lot of veterans that were on fire bases, and they lived a pretty decent life. But when we came in, the people all cheered us and everything, respected us, because we would have dirty boots on, and that's how they would tell that we were out there fighting their battle out in the woods. I just wanted you to know that.
That's all we have for this episode of Today's Veteran. We have big plans for this show in 2013, including a visit to the James A. Haley Veterans Hospital in Tampa, an overview of the branches and programs of the Department of Veterans Affairs, more on Florida's military history, and as always, news and information that pertains directly to the veteran community right here in Polk County. Until next time, I'll see you in the trenches.